Hi, welcome to the launch of the Funologist project, which is a sub-strand of our EdLab work. It's quite an interesting project in that it's the first of our big cross-faculty calls. And we've generated quite a lot of quite interesting sign-ups for participation from all sorts of different disciplines. So just kind of anecdotally, we've got engineering and we've got English with two of the people that I met as we first came in, but also a really interesting mix of undergraduates, postgraduates, staff, and outside partners who come along to play. So really the intention of this session is just to kind of agenda what it is we're trying to do in a very, very loose way. And to attune you to some of the things, for those of you who are non-expert, of which I'm kind of one, some of the things that are particularly interesting about this landscape in terms of education. I'm just going to start with a little bit of an admission that I am an enthusiastic amateur in relation to the kinds of stuff that we're doing here. I don't really have a tech background other than I'm a little bit nerdy. I do have a background in education, and kind of what interests me is looking at the things that go on around some of the tech stuff at the moment and what makes those things interesting from the outside. So that's what I'm going to talk to in my bit. And then towards the end, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the EdLab project and the way that these things hopefully all start to tie together. In between, we've got some people who are far more expert than me, just to give some quick 10-minute inputs on particular opportunities there are for us to do some work and particular qualities of the Funologist projects which look really interesting. Okay, so now incidentally, I've gone a bit mad with the diagonal thing. You might find it more accessible if you all tilt your heads 33 degrees. Yeah, just lean. I just wanted to start off by talking a little bit about these concepts of tinkering, hacking, serious play, the ways in which they've entered educational vocabulary, and some of the things that I think make them particularly exciting. So these are notions which have come to education via kind of the tech sphere. So predominantly, they've arisen through both formal and informal curriculum. So over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen changes to the IT curriculum in formal schooling, with a slight emphasis around certainly what my experience of IT was, which was how to learn a package. So how do you use Word, how do you use Excel and things like that, with a far stronger emphasis on computer science, on the mechanics, on the building, on the using things productively. So in part, this is language that's crept in the margins of schooling through those reforms. But perhaps more significantly, it's been introduced by a real burgeoning informal sector around tech education. There has been an explosion of stuff going on in the non-formal education sector around code clubs and coder dojos, around making and tinkering. And the people who run those activities tend not to be educationalists in the first instance. They tend not to come from a schooling background. In actual fact, lots of them have come from amateur enthusiasts and the maker movement. So there's a really strong orientation towards making stuff and breaking stuff and seeing what happens when you mess around with stuff. And as a result of that, the kinds of activities that those people have created have had a very unstructured, informal, open-ended, but productive sense. There's also been a kind of secondary explosion in the range of technological products available to support education. So we've gone from Arduinos and BASIC through Scratch and Makey-Makeys and 3D printers and all sorts of other things. And there's been an exponential growth in the amount of stuff available to support educational activity in relation to tech. I'm just going to pause for a moment with this. And just with this very first picture, because it's included in a slightly, for a personal reason. When I was a first year undergraduate, this has got no relevance, by the way. If you want to daydream, now's a good time to do it. When I was a first year undergraduate, I had a job in Toys R Us. And it was a hateful job. You would think it would fill you full of joy and happiness working in a toy shop. It really, really didn't. It destroyed my soul. Part of my role was to tidy the aisle, which was filled with Tickle Me Elmo. Only what will happen with Tickle Me Elmo, because it's turned on by default so people can do it, is if you trigger one Tickle Me Elmo at the beginning of that aisle, all of the other Tickle Me Elmos in like a cascade effect would all send now layer on a hangover. Not good. So this is an image. It's almost like my entire career has coalesced around a bit of revenge on Tickle Me Elmo. It's a slide which tries to capture, in a very, very incomplete way, the vast array of activity that has emerged around informal tech education and this commitment to tinkering, hacking, serious play. There's all sorts of stuff out there, and one of the things that I'd encourage you to do is just get out there and just Google and steal other people's ideas and look at the kinds of really exciting things that are happening already in kind of eruptive, almost unplanned ways, because this is the other quality of the kind of people who run these things. They bounce from project to project. They do this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And as a result, there's a lot of energy around this sphere of activity. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But what I wanted to do is just spend a little bit of time trying to articulate why, as an interested educator, rather than a tech educator, these particular kinds of activity are really exciting. So I've really, really done some thinking. This is nothing kind of formal and official and out there and published. This is me looking at these things and thinking, what is it that makes them really exciting in terms of the kinds of experience that they give to learners? Lots of the qualities are very easy to overlook. So they're very easy not to add significance to. But what I'd encourage you to do is, just as we go through them, think about your experience of education and the ways in which these kind of qualities puncture some of that. They rupture some of the things that actually formal structured education holds very, very dear. So for one of the things that really attracts me is the level of emergence and openness that these activities provide to learners. Because we exist in a formal education system which is dominated by trajectories and straight lines. If you think about the importance of the learning objective as the kind of the quintessential feature of a formal education classroom, these kinds of activities disrupt all of that, because they start from the basis that you're going to have a mess around and something will come out of that. It's something that conventional educational discourse really struggles with. They're sets of activities which are fundamentally physical. So the act of tinkering is something that your body is involved with. And it's a set of activities in which we don't necessarily presume that the theory comes first and then the set of activities come out of it. Actually, if you look at the way that people tinker, they mess with stuff. They physically interact with them. They have a tactile relationship with a body of stuff, and ideas might form out of that. It's not necessarily ideas to practice relationships. There's an embrace of the small, and I don't mean necessarily they're the small in terms of circuitry. I mean the small in terms of outcomes, in terms of progression, in terms of what we actually achieve. There's an embrace of things not being resolved. The act of tinkering is its own justification. It isn't necessarily you have to reach this particular outcome. And as a result, you end up with unusual kinds of intensities. And what I mean by that is, if you look at things like what motivates people and what gratifies people through that process of tinkering, they can be fleeting and at the same time very, very intense. If you watch a kid trying to solve a bug in a Scratch program or something like that, there's a real intensity that's associated with something very, very short term. Incidentally, I've assigned these concepts to particular terms, but I'm not sure it necessarily works that nicely. I think these notions wash across the terms. there's something about the deboundering of ideas. There's something about the taking of ideas from one place and the pushing them into somewhere else. The seeing what's possible around a product, an object, a thing, and adding extra functionality. And kind of connected to that is the brilliant value of breaking things. Take that, Tickle Me Elmo. This, for me, is a really, really interesting provocation because, again, formal education doesn't like broken things very much. One of the worst things that you can possibly produce in a conventional classroom is a wrong answer, is an incorrect outcome. Whereas in this set of practices, there is value to having broken something in order to understand it in a slightly different way. I think it's a really interesting little bit of fresh air. And then there are qualities around this which add value to imagination that are uncoerced. And again, just contrast that with the way we tend to orient learners to learning. There's something self-directed, self-perpetuated, and self-motivated. So for me, just some of the initial sense of what it is that creates these really interesting spaces around these practices of tinkering, hacking, and serious play. So it's a set of practices which have been associated with both formal and informal technology education, and which have produced perhaps a method of engaging learners with science which is more inclusive, which requires a fuller range of your human capacities and therefore values more of what people can contribute to them. But I also think that it's a set of practices which generate some really interesting cross-disciplinary opportunities. So whilst we tend to associate concepts like hacking with tech, and in particular with computers, I think there's all sorts of interesting ways that you can foster overlaps with other disciplines and subject areas. Either because in the way that we've talked about STEAM instead of STEM and started to integrate the arts into the work that's happened there are ways in which other subjects can happen within tech. Or because there are interesting experiments we can do distinct from tech education which draw on those qualities. I'm reminded, for instance, of I'm reminded of what happens when you watch little kids paint and the ways in which the things that they produce ebb and flow and are very much emergent. When you watch a 4-year-old paint a picture, they don't necessarily start with an idea of what this is going to look like. And the narrative that surrounds it twists and turns as they go along. There's a very tinkery kind of process in the way they interact. I'm reminded of creative processes in general and the ways in which ideas fall out of interactions. I want to know what tinkering looks like in an English classroom, in a creative writing classroom. I want to know what tinkering looks like in the full range of ways of knowing the world. Okay, so that's kind of the setup. What I want the Funologist to try and achieve is both more of the good stuff that's happening and also more of different good stuff that we can possibly start to imagine by thinking about how we take those concepts and map them elsewhere. I want to hand over to 3 guests who've agreed to come and speak for just a few minutes each as part of this lecture and just add a different spin to some of the things that I've talked about there. So I'm going to invite Sam first from the Faculty of Science and Engineering to come and talk about the interdisciplinary nature of these kind of things. Then Narinma and Ellie in turn. And then I'm going to return to the EdLab project and some of the ways that we can support some practical activity. So Sam, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Illingworth. I'm a senior lecturer in science communication in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. And I just wanted to talk just for a few minutes about interdisciplinarity and why it matters, because a lot of the things that are going to come out of this will hopefully involve you working across disciplines. So not just in the discipline that you find yourself currently working in, but other ones as well. But I wanted to start off by just asking you a question. I just want you to think about what you wanted to be when you grew up. So just take 20 seconds to think about that. Think back to when you, I don't know, or some of you still are, when you were like about 10 years old and somebody asked you what you wanted to be. The reason I've got this, for those of you who don't know, this is Charles Bukowski, who's a famous beat poet. I was an incredibly precocious 10-year-old, and so, well, I was actually about 12 when I wanted to be a beat poet. I don't recommend living the lifestyle of Charles Bukowski, who was an alcoholic and a horrific womanizer. So I didn't want to have that element of it, but what I did want to have was the element of his incredibly beautiful poems and prose as well. So just take another 10 seconds to think about what you wanted to be, and then turn to the person next to you and tell them. Turn to the person next to you or somebody else and tell them what you wanted to be when you grew up. Okay, so have that thought in your head. I heard some sensible answers and some silly answers, which are great. Everyone wants to be Indiana Jones when they were younger as well. Just have that in your thought. That's what you want to be when you grew up. Because what we absolutely need to avoid doing in education, in research, in all of our daily lives is this. We want to move away from this. We don't want to be siloed. Like every single time we try and do something, I find, in higher education or anything else, people try and pigeonhole us. People try and tell us that we are a scientist, or we are a poet, or we are a tinkerer, or we are a person that works in Toys R Us and is slowly going insane from doing so. You know, we need to move out of these silos, and we need to start thinking of ways that we can interact and move across discipline. And I just want to give an example from my own practice of how I do this. So my background is as an atmospheric scientist or a climate change scientist. So I did a lot of research on specifically using satellites to look at the Earth's atmosphere. But as I showed a picture earlier of Charles Bukowski, I've also always had an interest, if not a talent, in poetry. And what I thought would be really fascinating is if we could start to maybe bring the two disciplines together. So I thought that poetry might be quite an interesting way of communicating difficult concepts of science to a new and more varied audience. So I just want to share a poem with you. So there's a fantastic study that was done last year by some researchers in Canada, and they looked at the deglaciation of Western Canada. So this basically means they looked at how much the glaciers in Western Canada were receding because of climate change. And what they found was that by the year 2100, 70% of all glaciers in Canada are going to have disappeared if we continue at the present rate. If we continue to pollute the atmosphere even more, then actually what's going to happen is that 95% of those glaciers will have disappeared. So this is a poem that I wrote about that. In Canada, a study found how glaciers melt in the west. The shrinkage is beyond profound, with 70% at best. If we ignore the Earth's request, then 95% will go. New barren lands will not be dressed with climate change too warm for snow. The alpine streams and sapphire lakes, they too will go. And I thought that writing a poem would be quite an interesting way of communicating this research to an audience that would not normally be able to access that, either because the research was written in a fairly abstract language or because the research was so buried away that it was difficult to access. But then I thought to myself, okay, we've done the poetry of science, but would it be possible to actually turn that around and then to start turning this into a scientific study of its own right? So I came up with the hypothesis that you would be able to replace the scientific abstract. So every single piece of scientific research has an abstract attached to it, which is normally about 200-300 words that effectively summarises that piece of research. And sometimes it's written incredibly archaically and very difficult to understand. So I thought it'd be interesting, could we potentially replace all science abstracts with a poem? Because that would be useful for the general public. But they also still need to be useful for scientists. So what I did was I got 50 scientists and I gave them the original abstract, and I got 50 scientists and I gave them the poem, and I asked them a series of questions and asked them to rate the accessibility, the impact and the interest of the poem as well, and I turned that into a piece of research. So this is available at the moment, it's just going through peer review, and this effectively looked at our scientific abstracts written in poetic verse, an effective representation of the underlying research. The abstract that I wrote myself, I could have summarised by saying maybe, would probably be a fair indication of that, but this was an example of how we were able to work interdisciplinary, across disciplines, in science, the natural sciences, the social sciences, a little bit of educational theory in there as well, and then also the issue of poetry. And the reason I showed that is because everybody in this room, as well as the thing that they do for a living, has interests outside of that, and there's ways of combining those interests in order to make something far more exciting, far more energetic, far more real than the silos in which we often find ourselves. And so I think we should move away from traditional silos to something a bit more fun. And to show that's the case, I'm just going to ask you all to write a poem. Okay, so it's very, very straightforward. We're just going to write an acrostic poem. All that means is that you have to write something beginning with F, something beginning with U, and something beginning with N. I'm going to give you 90 seconds to do that. To show how easy it is, I've just written a very straightforward example: frolicking giddily under a new moon. There you go. That is what I would define to be fun. So you've now got 82 seconds to write a poem, just using the words F, U, and N. Off you go. You don't have to share them with anyone, just please do write, though. And as you're writing, I'll just talk as well, because I think poetry is a really, really useful way of starting to frame your research or your studies or your job or your life in different ways. And if you're ever in a position where you're absolutely stuck and you're thinking, I don't know where to take this anymore, I really have no new ideas, write a poem about it. That might sound like an incredibly trite and bizarre thing to do, but what it does is it engages a new part of your brain and it makes you start to think about the problem in a completely different way. So the next time that you're completely stuck with a work assignment or a piece of research or just something that you really don't want to do, just stop for a second and write a poem. And I promise you, you will start to think about things in a different way, and you'll start to be able to then tinker with that, to play with that in a serious but ultimately effective manner, so that we can move away from those horrible independent silos to something that looks a little bit more like this, where we can all come together into a giant silo with a huge violin stroke cello on the outside, in a metaphorical sense, obviously.
Okay, thanks, Sam. And then next, can I invite Arima to come up and do your bit before you have to...
So I'm Arima, and I started out in neuroscience, actually genetics originally. I was going to study at university, and then I met my genetics tutor, chatted to my biology teacher, and he said, and I thought I was interested in the brain, he showed us a video on the brain, and I was like, oh, actually, no one knows anything about the brain. I don't know anything about that. Could I study that? So when I came for my interview at Manchester University, I said to the genetics tutor, I really like genetics. There's loads of books about it, but I'm fascinated about the brain. And he said, well, pursue your passion and switch courses. And I did. And that kind of switching and following my interests has kind of followed me through my life. So it was fantastic, Mark, to hear from you. You've kind of explained all the weird stuff that I've been doing.
Oh, really? Can I just make it up as I was going along?
No, I'm like, okay, right, I'm in the right place. So at the moment, I'm kind of between, and I'm often between several different jobs. So I've set up my own social enterprise. It's called Squirrel Nation. It's a creative agency, and we do stuff that connects science, the arts, and the environment. And then I work part-time at the University of Manchester on what's currently called a citizen engineering project, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about. But it's really interesting to go back and think about what did you want to do when you were a kid. And I just wanted to play football for Brazil. And I told my mum that, and I pursued it for quite a while. And I actually made it into the school team with all the other boys. I was the only girl that was in the team. And then, when we came to play against another team, they said, no, we don't have girls. So encountering these barriers as you go along through life, it's finding ways to get around them. I think this kind of tinkering speaks to that. So fantastic to think about, all of your stuff that you do outside of university. How can you bring that into what you do and being passionate about that? So football, I've never quite, maybe at some point I might manage a football team, who knows? But that will come back. And then I think my next dream was to get involved in doing computers, because I discovered that I was quite interested in coding. And back then I'd been given a ZX81 computer, which is really old, doesn't exist now, although I discovered it in a exhibition in Berlin. It was in a box, and I really wanted to steal that computer, but never mind. But it kind of brought back to me this idea that it's not too late to pick up on your passions and bring them back into what you do. And I do that kind of all of the time. So this project that I want to kind of show you about, which in a way had its kick-off here at Manchester Metropolitan University, with some of the people that you're going to work with today, so Mick Chesterman up there and Michelle Lockwood. I'm a kind of opportunist and kind of love hearing from you, Sam, about bringing poetry. I used to write poetry, do open mic stuff in Manchester. It all went terribly wrong when I couldn't remember the lines, but there you go. So I wanted to kind of show you a bit of a call to action. And this video was, it's not even out there yet, so this is a draft version of it. But this is going to be put out about this project, and hopefully it might inspire you to think about how you might get involved in something in the future. So I'm just going to show you this really short video.
Manchester is European City of Science, and we want to build a recycled robot orchestra, and we want you to get involved. So what do you need to do? You need to get some machinery and start making your robot from anything, old computer parts or tin cans. Then you need to name your robot and get practicing. So get started. Make a robot, make some sounds, work together, get recycling, and make it happen.
So kind of this video that was kind of pulled together at a making tinkering event at the shed at MMU a few weeks ago, I think it was, something like that. This idea of failure and building that into a project like this, and that things can go wrong, that space was really important, that informal learning space where practitioners like Mick were able to kind of guide and change things and do things differently as the whole session was unfolding, kind of done over 2 days. But then amazing conversations would happen around that informal tinkering and doing stuff together. So I guess it's that thing of not being scared to try out technology. And every time I meet Mick, I learn something new. So this morning, I was having a go at that the code bug upstairs and thinking about what things can go wrong, but actually trying it out. And so I would really encourage you to kind of think about your passions and how you can bring that in, but also think about that this playfulness can take you somewhere, whether it's managing your football team or getting on a stage and playing some music. And the idea with this is we'll bring a whole orchestra of robots made by people across the whole of Manchester to play. We don't know how we're going to do that, and that's part of the challenge and the fun. And like Sam, I'm passionate about environmental sustainability, and I'd read a paper about how much stuff we're putting in the ground, and the paper concluded, we now have to learn everything about humanity. So there's a bunch of scientists saying this. I thought, no, we don't. We just need to work with people that care about the environment, but actually try some things out. And I thought, what if this idea of recycling technology and components that end up in the ground could be a way that we come together and kind of think about that, but try and do something about it. So a wonderful thing that happened at MMU is that your environment group said, yes, we do this fantastic recycling, we can help you. And so it brings all these networks and partnerships together and gets this whole supply chain thinking about this challenge, but we get to make music as well. And I get to learn about performance, so I'm quite interested in that. So I would say, you can bring your own agendas to these things, and I hope you have a fantastic idea. I'm sorry that I can't stay for the rest of the day. My twin brother and sister are 40 today, and they're having a party. My parents and my brother live in Copenhagen, so I'm going to go and celebrate with them. But thank you so much for inviting me along, and I look forward to hearing about what you get up to.
So this morning, Forbes released a new list. They're all releasing new lists, and these are the top 20 gazillionaires from the tech industry. So there's our first guy. I think we all know him, Bill Gates. Then we've got this guy here, Jeff. He's Amazon, I think. We know Mark Zuckerberg, I think. Larry, he's Microsoft, I think, with Bill Gates. Okay, so whizzing through. What do we notice about our top 20 list? They're all white, they're all male. No, not all white. So this guy, he heads up basically all of the internet in China. It all goes through his company. They're all old, yeah. I think perhaps to get your billions, you have to be old. But then we've got Lorraine, but she is Steve Jobs' widow. She runs his trust now, his charitable trust. Okay, but we've got these people here, and it's almost to them. It's to us. We're not looking at being billionaires. We're not looking at being, one of these tech giants. But we're thinking about these are the people who have got the power. These are the people who've got the money. These are the people who are running the companies. And we're thinking about the grassroots level. We're thinking about from the bottom up. So we need to be thinking about who are the people working in tech. Now, my role here at MMU, I look after computing and education here on the secondary teaching programme. And recently, the curriculum's totally changed. So we did have ICT, and there might be some people in here who did ICT at school, and you did lots of screenshots of a database, and then you added a record, and you did another screenshot, and we could measure your coursework by weight. We weigh it, and we go, right, that's an A. And, this one's not got enough paper in it, that's about a C. And so there was a big report, a big investigation, and they looked at ICT in schools, and they said, do you know what, it's actually really boring, and everyone's learning how to use a package. So we need to get rid of that, and they brought in computing. So from 2014, our new curriculum is around computing, right from Key Stage 1. So from the age of 5, children need to know what an algorithm is. Okay, some of you guys at school, you might have talked about algorithms and things. So there's a danger. And the danger is that ICT wasn't all bad. There was some fun bits, there were some creative bits, there were people making websites, there were people making, doing video editing and all sorts of things, and we got all these fun bits, and we might have accidentally thrown them all out because we've brought in this quite rigorous computing curriculum. And one thing that the government noticed when they were bringing in this new curriculum was this underrepresentation of women in the technology industry. So they thought, well, actually, if we give this more academic rigour, if we change our curriculum, then it will have a knock-on effect. Now, as part of my job, I go into lots of schools and I watch lots of lessons, and I was in 2 schools yesterday, and I was in some GCSE computing classes. I was in one class of 18 pupils, and of that class, there were 3 girls out of 18. Then I was in another GCSE computing class later in the day, and they had a class of 17, and there was 1 girl. Now, these are 14 and 15-year-olds, and at the moment, there is absolutely no change at all. In fact, we might have even gone backwards by introducing this academic rigour and this scientific slant. Now, this Proud Mummy moment, I don't think I've ever seen it that huge, okay? But that is my daughter. That is her at the EU Week of Code. She was making, she wanted to make a butterfly, and she wanted to press the butterfly's wings, and she wanted that to make a flower bounce all around the screen. So she did that, And she did that pretty much herself. That's my arm in the background. I didn't get on the Google blog, she did. So that's my arm, and I'm actually helping somebody else and returning a banana into a drum machine. But she's there, that was her, and that was her when she was 5. If you go on my Twitter, I'm at LEMMU, and you see my Twitter avatar, that's a picture that she just made on my iPad when she was 3. So she's progressing, she's getting there, and she's now 6. So it'll be interesting to see where she's going and what she's doing. And at the moment, a lot of the stuff that she's doing, she's just playing. That's not stuff that she's doing in school. And in school, her teachers are absolutely bricking it because they're thinking, I don't know what an algorithm is, I don't know how to program, I don't know how to code. And she's literally working through coding exercises. And she calls her lessons at school coding. That's her experience at school. It's not her experience at home. Because at home she's playing and learning by playing. And we've kind of got this contrast. We've got this issue. And we need to think about how is it that we are going to get more creativity into our curriculum, not just to encourage girls, but to encourage everybody. And everybody with an interest in lots of different disciplines as well. We don't just want tech people looking after tech. We want people who have got creative sides, people with an artistic slant. We want lots of different things. This lady geek up here, this is somebody that I want to talk about. Her name is Belinda Palmer. And she set up a company which was looking at women in tech. And she created a women-only company. She's written a brilliant book, which I normally wave around, called Little Miss Geek. But it's also my most loaned out book. So I haven't got it at the moment. But she set up her company. Okay, I'll just scroll up to the top here. And initially, her company was all about bringing women into the tech industry and saying that if you've got more women on your team, this will happen, that will happen. And as she's developed and worked with other companies, she's realised it's not actually anything to do with women, it's to do with empathy. It's to do with the approach of that company to looking at the products that they are producing and the people they are producing them for. So her slant is totally different. And that leads me into somebody else that I want to talk about, and that is Martha Lane Fox. Now, for people who haven't heard of her, she set up, she set up lastminute.com. But she wasn't from a tech background. She actually, her degree, I think, was in ancient history. But she had a vision as lastminute.com, what that would look like as a company. And she has since, she had a car accident, she got a very interesting sort of history as to where she's got up to this point. But she has now set up, as one of her many things that she's done, she has set up a social enterprise called .Everyone. And there was a Dimbleby lecture presented by Martha Lane Fox last year, and she was talking about women in technology, but not just women in technology, but about collectives, and about ways that we can do things working together. So, for example, one thing that Everyone's looking at is the NHS, and how we were talking about silos before, how we've got these different applications working all separately, and if we just integrated them at quite a small amount of cost, we could actually save millions of pounds. So it's different projects like that she's talking about. And one thing that she talks about, which I think is really interesting, is she talks about smartwatches. So I've got mine on here. So as I'm standing here, I can tell you what my heart rate is. I can tell you how many tweets I've had. I can tell you how many messages. I haven't got emails, otherwise it's like having an electric shock, because it's just going all the time. And one thing she talks about in her lecture is she says one thing that affects the health of all women that they think about an awful lot is their menstrual cycle. It affects your weight, can affect your mood, it can affect how much exercise you're doing, it can affect so much part of your life. And can you find a smartwatch that will track it? Can you heck? Because there's no women on the development teams, and if they just had one woman on that development team, then they would have thought of that, and they would have actually probably created a far more useful bit of tech. So what we need to do is we need to think about our approach to tech and our approach to using all these things in creative ways, in interdisciplinary ways, and avoid this stereotype. And this is one that is in the book from Belinda Palmer, and she got a girl who was 10 to draw a picture of somebody that she thought worked in the technology industry, and this was him. It was an IT guy. I won't go into it. I'm hoping none of you recognise yourselves among it. But one thing that does happen every year, there's something called Ada Lovelace Day, which happens in October. And Ada Lovelace is often called the first ever computer programmer. And she worked with Charles Babbage, and she created an algorithm. She identified an algorithm. She took papers that other people had written and actually wrote far more in the notes following the paper than the actual paper said itself. And she is still celebrated. And you think, well, perhaps it's time for us to move on and start thinking about the future. And these are the 3 key words, I think, that we need to think about, not just for getting women in tech, but getting everybody in tech. And that's inclusion, involving everybody, whatever background, whatever their discipline. Creativity, so thinking about new and interesting ways of doing things. And empathy, thinking about what we're doing it for, who are the other people who we could involve.
Inputs there from 3 people with a little bit more expert insight than I do. But just reinscribing the sense that this is an area that's got an awful lot of potential. There's lots of stuff that can happen, and that stuff can be generated because there are particular needs, whether that's engaging more girls and women in science, technology, engineering and maths, or because it presents a load of opportunities that are exciting and we could do stuff with. I just wanted to finish off with the bit that kind of pulls it all together, which is how the EdLab project, which is hosting the Funologists, can support some actual stuff to happen. So just a little bit on what EdLab is. It's a Faculty of Education project which is being offered as a university-wide enrichment opportunity. As we move forward, hopefully we start to bed it into some curriculums. And it's about trying to incubate a little bit of educational enterprise and innovation into what we do. So it's our response to, there's a university policy at the moment called E3, which is about students and developing employability, employment and enterprise. And what the EdLab project was us grabbing hold of enterprise and going, actually, that's really exciting for a Faculty of Education, because that just is doing really exciting things and then making them happen. So it's an incubator that is based around making projects happen around 4 key principles, around collaboration, participation, co-generation and agility. And just in brief, what that means is we do stuff. And we try not to spend huge amounts of time theorising about why we're going to do stuff and planning the stuff we're going to do. We try to just make stuff happen and then develop them as we move forward. And we try to do it in ways that blur some boundaries and try to pull some of those silos down. So they're based on collaboration between students and staff and outside partners and across the various disciplines that exist. They're based on principles of involvement, of being equal partners in the stuff that we do. And they're based on principles of doing things and iterating, making things happen, then working out how you can do them better. We try to move beyond a kind of theory to practice model, and we're based on the principle that you do stuff and then you understand what's going on. So we don't presume that the people who run the things that we do have huge amounts of expert insight. I certainly don't. I go through life on a massive blag, and no one ever seems to notice it, but that's what I'm doing. And I'm not ashamed of that, because what you do is you go through life on a massive blag, then you look backwards and go, oh right, that's what was going on. And that's the kind of opportunities that we try to create in the work that we do. We've got a particular set of working practices. Everyone's heads have gone like this again, which unfortunately for me as a speaker makes it look like you've all nodded off. I'm going to presume that it's my wonky angles and not my incredible boringness that's created the 33-degree angle. We have some particular working practices to support that, and these are the things that we're opening up to anyone really who wants to come and play. So the core thing that we do are the provision of creative spaces and EdLab challenges. What they do is they try to create a bit of inspiration for things to happen. So they do it in 2 separate ways. Our EdLab challenges are kind of curated, preformed projects. So they're things that we know we want to put in place, and we just need people to make them happen. And we send out the call, and people go, yep, I'll come and play. And there's not an awful lot of planning that needs doing, though you're welcome to come and kind of contribute to the direction of stuff. Everything is planned, you just come and help facilitate. Hopefully, so that then you go, actually, you know what, I can do this better, or I can do this differently, I can do this in a different context, mapped onto a different set of tech in this context. So there are EdLab challenges. Then we've got creative spaces, which are a little bit more open. And what we do with a creative space is we invite people just to come in and either play with a particular opportunity in the context of this project with a piece of tech, or with a particular context, without any preformed sense of what we're going to do with it. And then what we do in that creative space is we workshop that idea. So what could we do? So there's this place out there in Hube, just around the corner, that says, come and play with us. What could we do in that space which would be really, really exciting? So those two bits of provision are all about generating some ideas. Then we have a strand of support which is about helping those ideas actually happen. So we're able to help broker relationships with outside partners, with places that things are going to happen. And we're able to give either students or staff a little bit of supervision and guidance in the moving from I've got an idea to the doing a thing. Then alongside, we have activities that help to kind of add richness to that set of experiences. So we put on seminars. And the idea around the seminars is they help with a bit of conceptual development. So in relation to the Funologists, we've started to convene a seminar series called Hacking Pedagogy, which is all about trying to get under the surface of what makes this practice really, really exciting. And taking an awful lot of tacit knowledge. There's lots of people doing really good stuff, kind of on the hoof and kind of out of impulse, and it's just really giving an opportunity to turn that into something a bit more articulated. This is why this is exciting. And then we have a set of provision around workshops, which is about the kind of practical skills, whether those are project management, the things that you need to make a project happen, or at the other end, the way you then communicate that project in ways that mean something either to future employers or to other academics and students. So that's our kind of infrastructure, that's the way that we work. And this is an infrastructure that is open to everybody in the university. It's certainly something we're working with Faculty of Education students with, but one of the big things that we try to do is de-boundary. So we're trying to get away from that strong sense of who owns this project. We will facilitate it, but actually the people who participate in it are the people who make it happen, which is what that slide says. Okay, we have some immediate opportunities which arise around the kind of the Funologists agenda. We've got the stuff around involving girls in STEM. We're going to convene a project beginning on the 30th of March, which try to get a sense of that. So we've got some opportunities around involving women in science, technology, engineering and maths. We've got a venue, we're ready for activities to happen, and there's an open invite for people to come and participate in how we flesh this out. I really want to go and play with the robot orchestra. It looks fun. My childhood is littered with broken things, and I'm going to ring my mum later, because I would take the phone apart. I wouldn't learn anything from taking the phone apart, other than I broke the phone and I was now in trouble for breaking the phone. But now what I can do is go, do you know all that stuff I broke? Just getting ready for the robot orchestra. I think there's really exciting things we can do in relation to that project, and I think there's lots of opportunities of us having some interaction with some schools and some other community groups to really start to roll that out in the people that we connect with. The next one was an idea that I'm going to give credit to Liz over here from about. We were having a chat via Skype, and Liz was observing that lots of the stuff that happens around tinkering is little things in electronics. And where's the stuff about pulleys and levers and all of that kind of stuff? And actually there's a relationship between those two things. You know, the physics of electronics isn't disconnected from the physics of those bigger kinds of things. So the project that she pitched, and now I'm going to make her do, is around whether we can be inspired by, you know, the steampunk stuff. And whether we can do some physical steampunk, and maybe we draw some art students into that and things like that, and we'll do something around that. I think that sounds really, really exciting. We don't know what we're going to do with that yet, other than when you say an idea, I go, yeah, you do that. That's a good idea. Do it. And then we've got another project, which I'm really enjoying, around an ant's nest, which we're going to connect to the internet. And we're going to turn into a kind of open resource that schools can engage with. It's brilliant. They've got like leafcutter ants. They're horrible. And every time I come out, I'm like, there are ants on me. But they've got this ant's nest that runs through all of the John Dalton building that we're going to connect up to the internet. We're going to use webcams, so you've got some high magnification images. We're going to use some trip counters so that we're measuring the movement of those ants. And then we're going to educify it, which is a word I've made up. And then we've got a whole range of ad hoc schools engagement opportunities. There are all sorts of opportunities to plug just the thing that we want to play with into schools engagement that's happening already. So if you have an idea of a thing that we'd like to do, we can do it. The venue will exist. Just a little bit about what benefits kind of you'll reap from doing this. Hopefully, the thing that would drive you the most is it's going to be quite interesting doing this stuff, and it will give you a set of experiences which are fun and engaging and hopefully which generate a little bit of knowledge around these things. So I'll come back to that principle of you do stuff and then the understanding falls out of it. There's slightly more kind of mercenary, oh, that's not fair, is it? You mercenaries. There's some slightly more practical direct benefits also in that, certainly for our undergraduates, it gives you opportunities to demonstrate the breadth of your employability skills, that you can lead projects, that you can follow creative processes, whether that's because you want to progress into education or in general. There's enterprise stuff going on. There's some direct benefits for those of you who have aspirations to progress and be teachers. We have the agreement that EdLab experiences count towards the kind of schools engagement activity you need to apply for a PGCE, and we will also support you in that admissions process. So that's quite a powerful benefit. And then we'll pay you some cash, which is always a good thing. When we do schools outreach work in particular, we often pay students to work as outreach ambassadors. And there's lots and lots of opportunities for you to engage with that. Okay, so hopefully lots of... I went mad with the angles on this one. I realised there were more angles than 33 degrees. There was also minus 33 degrees, and you could go the other way. So next steps. We've curated a very informal first creative space. So in room 366 and 376 and 377, which are our design and technology rooms, there's some various bits of tech for you to have a mess with. We don't have any very strong expectations of what you get out of that, other than go and have a play with some of the stuff that already exists and see if some ideas are generated on the basis of that. So go and just have a play. Some of the tech is slightly less techy than you'd expect. There's some Lego up there and there's some Play-Doh. Mainly for you to have a think about the processes of how you engage with that and that notion of tinkering and what happens when we tinker. The next kind of intermediate thing for you to do is, if you've got an idea, tweet it. So Mick and Juliet look after the EdLab Twitter. She's at EdLab MMU because I'm a Luddite. And whenever I use Twitter, I break it. Like, we use it in ways you're not meant to. And you can see Mick going, oh, Mark, what have you done? You've just tweeted the whole world. You've got the whole world tweeted with your lecture activity. If you use the hashtag Funologist, we'll start to collate some initial ideas. What I don't want you to do is feel like you've got to have a fully formed thing that you want to put in place. If you've got that, great, communicate it to us and we'll help you put that into practice. Half-baked ideas are the lifeblood of EdLab, so don't feel ashamed of them. And then the final thing that will happen is, by the end of this week, we will send out a follow-up email, both to the people who've attended today and those of you who've sent apologies and can't get here, which is about trying to put in place some next steps. So it will be about a call to action for projects we've got running that you may want to sign up to and be a part of. It will be an opportunity for you to signal what kinds of experience you'd like out of this, and also to share any other things that you would like to see happen. Okay, so great, thanks for your time. I don't think we need to be in a lecture theatre for any longer. The next phase of the day is very, very informal. So up in 376 and 377, there's some stuff for you to have a play with. And there's also an opportunity to network. So one of the things I'd encourage you to do is just have a chat with each other, as well as playing with the tech.